Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm going to go as fast as I can to be on time, in part because I think the rain might let up and you might all leave. Thank you very much for having me. The data I'm going to look at, we actually didn't look at the future of the work. We looked at technology, but you can't look at technology without talking about the future of work, and it's a byproduct of what people look at and how they view technology. Everybody probably has heard of Ipsos in Canada. Anyway, we used to be Angus Reid, then Ipsos Reid, now Ipsos. Largely known for our political polling. It's a very, very tiny bit of what we do. This work that I'm going to present today is our own work. We do about, on the public side, and it's not just public, but private sector that's interested in public issues, about 250, 300 custom studies a year. We do our own work around some of the context issues, views of the economy, views on the way the world's going, because we like to be able to frame all of our clients' custom studies in sort of the bigger picture. So this is our work. It wasn't commissioned for any clients. It's just something we do. We have the advantage of being able to collect data, and we're sort of geeks in some of this area. So I'm going to skip over this because I'm going to get to it as we go through. Well, very quickly, it's been in several waves of the Canada Next study that we've done. They've been large online studies. If someone wants to come up and debate the merits of online versus telephone, happy to do that later on, but I'm not going to do it in my time right now. I threw this in because this is what the average person with low knowledge, if you only see the next two slides, you can leave after this. The average person with low knowledge, this is what they think about the future of technology. Jobs are going to disappear. And it's largely going to be jobs like drivers that disappear. There's tons of media stories and coverage that look like this. Those who have a little bit more knowledge might be reading Fast Company, and it's not that much more reassuring. Half of jobs are going to be automated. All jobs are going to change. Nobody really can predict what's going to happen, but we're all going to have to learn new skills. So with that, you see there's a ton of uncertainty, a ton of angst. Marta said that was one thing that came out of both of our presentations was the level of concern and angst that's out there. I know this conference is about the future of work, and I would say for men and young people, definitely a discussion about the future of work. For older Canadians and for women, it's more about the transition of work and things that are happening now. So, Keith mentioned earlier, sort of that we invest in reskilling or are we investing in the next generation? And there is a split there in the public about where they think some of this should go. If you look at sort of today, and I said it's uncertain, the numbers look pretty good today. Job unemployment rate is fairly low, but you start to ask people to cast forward, and about half say they're confident in the next 6 months, and that's come down a little bit. The personal financial prospects has come down a little while, and only half of Canadians say that in the next 10 years they expect their personal economic situation to stay the same or get worse. So half of Canadians say stay the same or get worse. Now, typically when I do this and I present it, I ask people for a show of hands, how many people think their personal situation is going to stay the same, status quo, or get worse? And because of the people I talk to, nobody puts their hands up. So then I say, so imagine if I go to Southern Ontario and I go into St. Thomas, that means about 8 in 10 people are putting their hands up going, yeah, status quo would be pretty good for me over the next 10 years. So imagine that kind of population that you're going to talk to about reskilling, talk to about change, talk to about where they're going to get their next jobs. They're already built in this angst and concerned about where things are going. Looking ahead at sort of the impact of technology, the study we did, we didn't ask people straight up, how do you think about the future of automation, where it's going, the Internet of Things. We looked at the World Economic Forum's. They do a big report every year where they survey several thousand CIOs, CTOs, and people who know a lot more about technology than me, and say what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And we took 50 of those scenarios, like will internet glasses be connected to the internet? Will 10% of vehicles be autonomous in the next 10 years? And we asked people how likely that was going to happen in their own minds, whether it was good for them, good for Canada, and who's responsible as you look forward. And we didn't really ask who's responsible. We said, is it something you can handle yourself as a citizen, as a consumer, you feel pretty confident about? Is it something you think that the businesses you deal with, you trust to deal with, or is it something you want to see governments more involved in? So why it's phrased here as responsible, but it's not, wasn't exactly the question. And what we did when we looked at all 50 and we looked at all the questions, we built a bit of an index on where people thought they were going, and Canadians are pretty much dead split between skepticism and believers. The difference being, and I should point out, they're not skeptical or believing that this technology change is going to happen. To a person, everybody says the train's coming, It's happening. No one's a Luddite, but they're very doubtful of the benefits if you're a skeptic, or very pro and enthusiastic if you're a believer. Believers are more likely men. They're younger, they're liberal voters, and when you sit them down in a room of focus group and you say, why are you a believer? They say, well, I hope, I feel, and I think. The skeptics, on the other hand, are all those other people, and when you say, why are you skeptic? They say, I know someone who's had a privacy breach. I know someone who's lost, to your point, who's lost hours in their work because of technology. I know someone who's lost a job because of technology. I have a neighbor who has a 27-year-old living in his basement who can't get a job because of technology. So the skeptics were grounded in real experience. They had felt it, they had seen the hurt and then those things. And the believers, largely young men, were like, everything's gonna be great. Everything's gonna be fine. I'm pretty happy about it. So we asked Canadians, who are going to be the biggest winners and the losers? And not surprisingly, and it mirrors some of Aaron's data, the winners are going to be big business, people who live in big cities, young people, those who have high income, the wherewithal to take on technology. I don't know if you saw Mike Moffat's stuff about sort of the uneven economics of Ontario. Almost all the growth has been in Ottawa and Toronto, so if you're not in Ottawa and Toronto, you haven't experienced a lot of it. So that's where you see some of the urban-rural splits, but the losers are also going to be the people we are focused most on bringing into the economy and trying to create equity for right now. Immigrants, Indigenous population, older Canadians, low-income Canadians. I should point out, these are attitudes, not necessarily what's going to happen, which I don't normally point out, except yesterday I was speaking on social cohesion, and someone started to interrupt me and say, you're wrong. And I said, it's not me, it's Canadians. And they said, well, Canadians are wrong. So it is how people view the world, not necessarily how it's going to unfold. On some of this technology, our view is if people expect it to happen, they're more likely to adopt. There's a quicker path for it. So it does give you some cues on where things are likely to go. You'll see a number of slides like this. So this is the sort of the core of that Canada Next study, where we took the World Economic Forum, some of the actual things that might happen, and we asked, good, bad for you, good, bad for the country, and I'll talk about sort of responsibility later. So the green balls are net positive impact for Canada, or your personal impact. Throughout the study, across all 50 items but one, people tended to say the positive impact or the negative impact would be greater for Canada, less so for me. And I think that's a combination of people not quite sure it's hit them yet, right? So I think drone-delivered packages are going to be great. It's commonplace, it's convenient, it's perfect. I think a lot of people benefit from it. Not sure how all benefit from it quite as strongly, but generally positive. 10% of cars and trucks on the roads will be driverless. Again, most people think, that's great. Good opportunities, efficiencies, convenience. 10% of retail transactions will be delivered via autonomous vehicles. Again, something that people thought was a positive thing. The flip side of automation, autonomous robots, is job loss. If you look at the red circles, those are people who said these are going to have a net negative impact either on Canada or myself. Majority say that it's likely to happen in the next 10 years that the manufacturing jobs will consist of managing robots, programming robots, that robots will replace 80% of all manufacturing jobs. That's like 4.2 million people fall in transportation, manufacturing, retail, those jobs that people think are going to change the most. Or the robots will become commonplace at retail checkout counters. These are majorities. Significant minorities think we're going to replace pharmacists. Some very high-end jobs. Nurses, doctors, teachers, more hands-on. There's less likely that they think we can replace those with robots, but they think they can be enhanced with robots. So that's where you see the job loss come in, and people who think these are almost all of the negative things. When we started to talk to people, well, why you don't think those are good? They're like, because people are going to be displaced from work, because we're going to lose the human touch. So just looking at changes to retail and money, we asked about retail because there's so many people work in retail. Half of all retail transactions, including groceries, will occur online. Over 75% of all purchases and financial transactions will be through your smartphone. People generally, again, for convenience, for ease, for a whole range of things, said these are things that I think are going to happen, and I think they're going to be a good thing for me. Now, the flip side, because there's a flip side to every technology, oh, not quite there yet, sorry. We're also going to be increasingly cashless. 8 in 10 say that over the next 10 years, 90% of their purchases, over 100, will be cashless. And this one I thought was quite striking. 28% agree in the next 10 years paper money and coins won't exist anymore. Now, when I presented it the very first time, someone said, it's only 3 in 10. But it's 4 in 10 millennials, and we've had coins since, I think it's 600 or 700 BC. So 4 in 10 millennials think that in the next 10 years, they won't be surprised at all if we have a completely cashless society. Millennials are more comfortable with the digital economy. Millennials are driving fintech. Millennials are as happy to bank with the Bank of Google as they are with any of the traditional banks. They have a very different view of the world going forward, and they're quite willing to make that leap. So you can see the difference in transactions. I don't know how many people have gone by their kids' school and seen them selling lemonade or the baked goods and gone, I only have a card. And my 8-year-olds don't have a card swipe yet, so they lost out on some money. But that's going to become more and more of a reality. The downside to the economy going digital is the decline in bricks and mortar. 3 in 4 say it's very likely to happen that there'll be half as many retail stores in the country, that half of the physical bank branches will close up. I know John said that might not happen, but Canadians think it will. I think it's 3 in 10 who say we're going to have half as many theaters just because people are going to be staying at home. And when you ask people about sort of why this is a negative, well, there's job loss is one thing, but the other thing is everybody thinks, well, Yonge Street will be fine because that retail will turn into this experiential, this nirvana where you can go downtown and do things. But I can tell you Talbot Street in St. Thomas is already, if you drive down Talbot Street in St. Thomas, if you drove down 15 years ago, the side streets were where you saw the antique stores, the swap shops, the used clothing. That's all the main street now. Because all of the main street where you could buy audio equipment, where you could buy clothes, where you could buy shoes, those stores don't exist. So the side stores have come to the main street, and that's happened in small towns over. So people aren't going downtown to small towns nearly as much. There's social cohesion issues with you're not going downtown. So a whole range of things that happen. The retail has been the center of our communities forever, and that may change in the future according to Canadians and their views of the world. So I'll spend a little more time on this one because this is who's responsible for the 50 items that we put into the survey. And again, they range from the decline of bricks and mortar to the diversity of communities to increased use of data and the Internet of Things. And again, the question was, I'm good with it. I have it as a citizen, as a consumer. I have the wherewithal, the ability, the knowledge to handle this, and I'm confident I can deal with it myself. I trust business, and I trust the business I deal with to look after this. These are areas I'm unsure of, and I want government to weigh in more. Now, we presented this to a number of our government clients, and to their dismay, there's not a lot there for government, according to Canadians. The biggest areas are healthcare and nanosensors. And nanosensors, because the questions we asked about nanosensors, we're putting them into your bloodstream and into your body, which was health-related, which Margaret's shaking her head. A third of the population said they would do it in a heartbeat like that to get better tack on with their health. Largely, when we talked to people and said, why do you want government involved in nanosensors and healthcare? It's because we want them to pay for it. I want you to pay for my wearable devices. I want you to pay for all these things, because if they're going to make me healthier, and we did a big release for the Canadian Medical Association earlier this week, if they're going to make me healthier, I think it should be part of the public health system. The younger generation want to harness technology and go from a health system that focuses on sickness to wellness. But in all of the other areas, if you look at it, it is predominantly business or predominantly as citizens. I've got it myself. Very disconcerting, I know, for some of our clients. They wanted to focus on data and who's going to control the data and privacy and protection. And most people say, you know what, I think I got this. I'm not sure I need a lot of help. Again, public attitudes, they're probably wrong, but this is how they feel about it going in. This is why they're willing to accept it. They trust banks with their personal information more than they trust almost anybody else because of the long tenure of looking after our money. But all of this angst and change has an impact on how they view the future and where they're going to go. So that's looking 10 years forward. I'm going to do a couple slides quickly on the gig economy and where it is today. Again, this is an online study, so if you want to poke holes in it, because, of course, more people online will have been part of the gig economy, go right ahead. 13% of online Canadians have participated in the gig or sharing economy. We asked about have you done anything facilitated by technology? We mentioned Uber, Airbnb, TaskRabbit, Etsy. Not surprisingly, more younger Canadians than older Canadians, 16% of university grads. So you get an idea of sort of the growing part of that gig economy. We ask people, do you think that it's a good thing for society and encourages entrepreneurship, or is it a threat to traditional jobs? A 60-40 split, not surprisingly, again split by age, with younger people more likely to say that this is a good thing, and older people saying it's a threat, it's a concern. This next slide, this is what happens when Canadians really don't know what they're talking about. I shouldn't say that, sorry. This is what happens when they're uncertain. Jury's still out on regulating. So you can look at these numbers and you can do the math and go, wow, there's a lot of overlap in there, people agreeing with the same thing over. 73% say, you know what, it's really risky and we need to put proper consumer protection on the gig economy, governments need to step in, yes. 64% say, you know what, these need to be relaxed in order that this can happen, we need to move forward. And then 43% say, it's nothing but unregulated business and it needs to be shut down. So needless to say, we ask this, we expect it will evolve considerably as we move from 13% who are doing it, more people do it. Anecdotally, I have asked every Uber driver, every Lyft driver, every person I've ever met who's involved in gig economy what they think about it. Not one person has ever said to me, and this is completely anecdotal, I took it because it's the only thing I had. They all took it because it offers me flexibility, it gives me something to do other than my day job. Not one person has, now I'm not saying they didn't take it because it's the only job they had, but they've never positioned it that way. They've never said, this is all I could get. They all put a very positive spin on it. So we'll see, we'll have to do a survey of Uber drivers and see how they feel about it. So this next section, I've talked about the what jobs, but you can see it pretty clearly here. There's two questions here. 58% of the population say advances in technology will create mass employment. And then the second one is technology is changing so quickly I'm having a hard time keeping up. It's split by men and women, but also by generation. And you can see that across every generation, men are less likely to be concerned about the job loss and predict, other than in millennials, and more likely to say, you know what, I'm okay with the sort of the pace of change and where it's going. So they're very connected. You know, we do have a big gap between generational gap, but also a big gender gap. That's coming out of technology. When we pulled apart all of the Canada Next data, it was very striking to see the differences between men and between women. At the end of it all, our only conclusion was one of two things. We will see greater inequity as men adopt technology faster and more furiously than women, or women will be our savior because they were the ones going, whoa, slow down, and being more cautious. Men are more likely to share information, more likely to jump in, more likely to say that there's benefits to it, much less cautious about going down that path. 62% support attacks on robots, 3D printing, basically anything that creates value but doesn't create jobs in order to fund social programs. I don't have the data here, and I have so much in my head, most of it useless. About 50% say they would support a tax on data, a user fee on data transfers, which is another form of value creation that doesn't go in. So there is an out for governments here. If they would like to, because as the gig economy gets going, as employment drops, most Canadians today would say, sure, put a little tax on data, sure, put a little tax on automation in order to fund the social programs that we see coming up in the future. I spoke at an advanced manufacturing conference, people shuddered and said, can you imagine what that would do to automation, would slow down innovation, a whole range of things, but that's not necessarily the purest political motive in some of these things. In terms of sectors, we asked Canadians, I think we tested 23 sectors, 24 sectors, who's on the leading edge and who's on the trailing edge. The leading edge isn't all that surprising to me: telecom, communications, banking, finance, automotive, entertainment. On the trailing edge, all of our natural resources industry, who will tell you to a person, and John mentioned it early, to forestry, mining, fishing, all of those things are very tech heavy. But Canadians don't see it that way. It has huge implications for those companies in terms of attracting talent because young people are not going where the technology is not, has implications for attracting investment, has a whole range of implications for the future. Disconcerting in there, government services low on the sort of the tech side, as well as seniors care. Where do we think the good jobs are going to be? A fairly similar list on the left side with the addition of healthcare, because we, to a person, know that we have an aging population, and we assume we're going to need more healthcare, not less healthcare, and construction, because everybody sees it, everybody recognizes that there's still houses being popped up everywhere, and everybody sees declining infrastructure. So even though those aren't high areas on the tech side, they are areas where people assume that they're going to get jobs. On the flip side, I mentioned retail before about how people think the technology is going to wipe out most of retail jobs. It's not. It's on the side of those where we won't see jobs, as well as agriculture, mining, forestry, fishing. And then I threw a couple slides in because Marta said it'd be great to have some global data on this. The next two slides are from a study we looked at, a global study where we looked at the importance of sort of broader country attributes to purchase and use of technology. So I won't spend a lot of time on it, but we asked the natural things, right? If you're thinking about buying technology or using technology, how important is cost? How important is convenience, ease of use? How important is it that the actual software or the tech actually functions? And so these are the total importance for across the 23 countries we tested. But look very closely behind. How important are country attributes, the country of origin for that technology, supporting job transition, protecting privacy, knowing that there are good policies for gender and race equity, knowing that there are good policies around protecting the environment. They're only about 10, 12 points behind. So, you'd expect that, you're not going to buy things or use things that cost too much, are inconvenient, or don't work. But these other things, these other values are actually quite important. And when we asked people across the 23,000 people across the 23 countries, who probably do they think doing the best job, at least on the reskilling side, we asked for all the questions, just show the reskilling. Canada ranks third. Not surprisingly, it's general public questions. A lot of people said, I don't know. And more people chose their own country than any other country. And that's fairly natural. They think they're doing fairly well, and our country's pretty good. But Canada ranks third behind Germany, Sweden, and then the U.S. So I actually have time for very quick conclusions. In terms of political implications, I think the future of work is going to require immense cooperation and immense coordination and consistency over time. And today we have a very polarized political environment where the first thing we do is try to wipe out everything that the guys before us did. So that's going to be a problem in terms of consistency, because as long as governments if they continue to shift back and forth. I think it's likely that governments will continue to shift back and forth, because there is a general angst amongst the society about the future and where things are going. They're not sure how to get it off, so it's very easy. And the next election, the next federal election, will be very telling, because we have been in a long cycle of two-term majority governments. Each government that gets elected the first one gets the second one, and we'll see if it gets broken in 2019, and it's a long ways off from either side knowing where it's going to go. But that'll be very telling, I think, in terms of that level of angst. It's just because we can't figure out who we should blame for some of these things. And I'm a little bit worried. There are two issues that Canadians look at as very important, but they largely think that the policy levers are ineffectual, and those are healthcare and climate change. We want to see something done on them, but we don't know that anything that can be done can be effectively changed with the course of where we are. I think that labor market transition has a chance that it could fall into that category longer term as an issue that it just happens, and I don't think that any government really has a solution to it. And so those are very worrisome things for me when we look at sort of value of government and why people vote and where they go. And then on the policy implications, we have a population without a lot of knowledge or a lot of confidence in what to expect. So if you're trying to get people to reskill, if you're trying to get them to save for training, if you're trying to motivate them, context. When we look at our behavioral science work, context is huge. If they're in space of uncertainty, they don't know what's going to happen. It's very hard to motivate people to take action. We're increasingly divided by age, and not only are we divided by age, but those who are least positive are least likely to have pensions. So you have this older population that's sticking around the workforce longer. They have pensions, they have confidence, squeezing out some opportunities for younger people. So there's a lot of things at play there. I think we'll see According to the population, we're going to see mass unemployment and a difficult transition, particularly among older populations. I don't know if it's a post-war type transition, but there's certainly that same sort of level of angst amongst the population about massive changes about happening. I think the difference with this is it's probably ongoing and probably continues for several years. And then finally, I think there's going to be immense pressure on governments. There is public support for new types of taxes in order to fund social programs to try new things. There is no public support for more income tax. So if you can tax data just a little bit on all those transactions, or you can tax robots just a little bit, there are opportunities to raise funds. Thank you.